The Subcommittee on Housing, Transportation, and Community Development is called to order. And I want to thank our witnesses that are here in person as well as our virtual witness for participating in this hearing today, along with my colleague, Senator Lummis. Thank you so much for our great working relationship on this subcommittee. And also I want to thank the Banking Housing Committee staff and our staff for helping to put together this hearing today. So without a safe, decent, affordable place to live, nothing else in your life works. Not your job, not your education, not your health. And it is nearly impossible without a safe, decent place to live, to hold a job or go to school or to stay healthy. And today in this country, we face a serious problem when it comes to a lack of housing supply. In 2021, there was less housing for rent and for sale than at any time in 30 years, according to Moody's Analytics. Between 2012 and 2022, over 10 years, we saw 15.6 million households form, but in that same time period, only about 11.9 million housing units were completed. So annual supply of housing units is running severely behind demand and needs to dramatically increase in order to catch up. Since the housing crash in 2008, we've seen a small recovery at the high end of the housing market, but not for the middle or the low end. So the biggest undersupply we have is at the low, for households at the low and middle income levels. It's estimated that we're short about 7.3 million rental homes that are affordable and available to low-income renters. And again, according to Moody's, in 2022, the share of household income that is needed to rent an average-priced apartment crossed that rent burden threshold of 30% for the first time in nearly 25 years of tracking rents and income. So this is a real problem, right? In 2021, 1 in 4 renters paid more than half their monthly income in rent. And these affordability problems are not limited, of course, to renters. Just 10% of new homes sold for less than $300,000 in 2022, down from 41% in 2019. And more than 1 in 4 homeowners in the U.S. are spending more than 30% of their incomes on housing costs. So that's a lot of data, a lot of numbers, which shows that we have a housing shortage and that it is not limited to one state or one part of the country. It is true, this is true in rural areas, suburban areas, and urban areas as well. In communities across Minnesota, people tell me that there are just not enough places to live. And here's what that looks like. I hear from employers who are spending their time helping their prospective employees find housing because they can't hire them if they can't find a place for them to live. I hear from families who are finding that home ownership is increasingly out of reach, especially for starter homes, which don't really exist anymore. A nonprofit in Duluth recently posted 2 openings for affordable housing on social media and got 77 applications just overnight. That was up to 95 the next morning. So there are a lot of factors and policies that have been made, decisions that have been made over time that have led to this situation. But simply put, we have made it very hard and very complicated and too expensive to build homes. And yet, as we will hear today in this subcommittee hearing, we have great examples of local innovation, communities tackling these issues to boost the supply of housing. In my hometown of Minneapolis, for example, we've been at the forefront. Minneapolis was the first major American city to end exclusive single-family zoning. The city moved to legalize triplexes in every part of the city and has pursued other important reforms to boost the supply of housing, like stopping required parking requirements and allowing accessory dwelling units, or casitas, as my colleague from Arizona calls them. In Duluth, I just recently visited a housing development of affordable cottage homes. So this is an example of gentle density that the city has used. They were able to do this because of upgraded zoning codes. And as I've said, this isn't just a big city issue either. This summer in Minnesota, the city of Wilmer, which has a population of about 21,000, just eliminated minimum parking requirements. So all across the country, Arizona, Anchorage, everywhere, we are seeing communities take steps to increase housing supply. And so today we're going to have a chance to hear from folks who are doing this work to understand what does work and what we need to do more of. I'm excited to hear, in particular, I want to just mention, we're going to hear from my friend from Minnesota who is going to be talking about the work done at the grassroots to develop support for these kinds of housing policies. So I look forward to hearing your ideas for what is the best role for the federal government as we tackle these problems. What can we do around financing, around aligning our incentives better? What should we stop doing? Are there things that we're doing that aren't working that we need to stop? And as we think about this, I think it's important for us to just acknowledge that for really almost forever, the federal government has played a really important role in housing policy. Goes back almost 100 years to the creation of the federal home loan banks, and that role then continues to this day as we see our support for the 30-year fixed mortgage and for the mortgage interest deduction. And it's also true that the federal government has a history of contributing to some of the challenges that we face in housing, particularly around systemic discrimination and the racial wealth gap. So I'm really glad that we're going to hear today about some bipartisan ideas, because this is an area of bipartisan interest, looking at housing supply and innovations around zoning and land use and regulatory reforms, something that many of us can agree on, and that states from across the political spectrum are taking steps and making reforms to improve the ways that communities can build housing that people need. I know that we're going to learn a lot from this hearing. These issues are too important for us to ignore, and I'm very grateful for your participation and for this work we're doing today. And now I turn to Senator Lummis for her opening statement.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. I am really grateful for your work on this part of the housing dilemma, and I really appreciate the way that this committee's really worked in a bipartisan manner. I further appreciate your convening this hearing on how policy and innovation can help ease the housing supply shortage in this country. And I want to thank our witnesses who are also working to that end for being here. Buying a home is a critical part of the American dream, and that dream is out of reach for an increasing number of Americans because of high prices and high mortgage rates. And I continue to hear weekly when I'm home and from constituents that are struggling to find a foothold in the housing market. I also hear from companies that want to expand into new areas but cannot do so because the talented workers they need can't find housing nearby. The nurses, police officers, and others we need in our communities often cannot afford to live where they serve. Without enough housing, we damage our communities, hold back the small businesses that power this country's growth, and make it harder for millions of families to build wealth. Estimates of the housing supply gap vary, but we will need millions of additional housing units to meet demand. The housing market is not kept up. When markets fail, it is important that we look at what's causing the failure. Many of the barriers to building additional housing are not within the scope of federal policy. I still want to acknowledge where all of us can work to do better. First, we need to reduce the regulatory burden on housing development. The National Association of Home Builders found that almost $94,000, or almost 24% of our current average sales price of new single-family homes, is due to regulatory burden. $94,000 per housing unit, regulation. It's even worse on the multifamily side. Over 40% of the cost of development is driven by regulation. Building codes are controlled at the state and local level. It's important the state and local governments evaluate what they can do to make housing more affordable and help solve the housing shortage. And of course, higher interest rates are a huge problem. Higher rates are our fault. It's the fault of Congress. We've spent too much money and touched off higher inflation. If rates are high, homeowners with a low mortgage rate have an incentive to stay in their homes. That includes the 82% of Americans with a rate below 5%, 62% with a rate below 4%, and almost a quarter with a rate below 3%. There's no incentive to downsize or upsize if you've got that kind of a mortgage interest rate and you're facing market rates where they are today. As a result, most people are just staying at home, or most buyers' only option is new construction. Higher rates don't just make it harder for Americans to afford to buy a home, they also affect every stage of housing development, all of which is financed. And I want to dig into this topic with our witnesses. I also want to dig into the innovations that you bring to the table, because typically American innovation helps solve some of the issues that vex us, and you have found ways to solve the problems, and we appreciate your being here. We can evaluate the programs we have in place for improvement and efficiencies here in Congress. We can free up federal lands for building affordable, reasonably dense housing. We can look at steps to ease supply chain challenges. We can support what the market does best, which is adjust in the face of shifting demand. I saw recently that the average size of new homes are decreasing to meet the needs of today's first-time home buyers with constrained budgets. And that's in direct response to market demand. Modular housing, which I'm really excited to hear about today, is a great way to reduce costs and another market innovation that we can champion. So I want to definitely thank the gentleman from Colorado for being with us today. So I especially want to look beyond the policy tools Congress has traditionally used to solve housing by spurring demand through vouchers and access to financing. These tools may have their place, but right now, we don't have a housing demand problem. We have a housing supply problem. So with that, again, I thank you so much, Madam Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses, and I look forward to our hearing today. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Senator Lummis. So we have 4 witnesses with us today. I'm going to introduce each of you, and then we'll begin testimony. I want to welcome Jenny Schutz for joining us today. She is Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. Dr. Schutz is the author of Fixer Upper, How to Repair America's Broken Housing System. She was previously the Principal Economist for the Federal Reserve Board and an Assistant Professor at the University of USC, University of Southern California. She has a PhD in public policy from Harvard. Joining us remotely will be Jana Flistrand. She is the co-founder and board member of Neighbors for More Neighbors. Ms. Flistrand led the statewide Minnesota Green Communities program for 10 years and a national network for 3 years. She has been a landlord for 27 years. Gregory Good, welcome, is Chief Real Estate Officer and Director of Asset Management at Invest Newark. Mr. Good works with Invest Newark's land bank to boost home ownership and develop affordable housing. He has extensive experience working in housing and community development, including at the Newark Housing Authority, the City of East Orange, and the City of Newark. And we have Eric Shaffer, who is Chief Business Development Officer at Fading West. Fading West is a factory-built construction company in Colorado where he has worked for 5 years. He partners with municipalities, developers, and general contractors throughout the western United States. We will begin with Dr. Schutz and then turn to Ms. Flistrand and then to the other panelists who are here in person. Witnesses, you have 5 minutes for your opening statements, and each of you have a clock in front of you to help you keep track of time. And of course, your full written statement will be made a part of the record. Dr. Schutz, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Thank you, Senator Lummis, members of the subcommittee. And thank you for holding this hearing today on the important issue of housing supply and innovation. My name is Jenny Schutz. I'm a senior fellow at Brookings Metro. My testimony will address national and regional trends in housing supply, the role of overly strict regulations, and highlight opportunities for federal engagement. The U.S. is experiencing a persistent and widespread housing shortage. The past decade has seen increasingly tight housing markets due to strong demand and limited supply. Since the Great Recession, the U.S. has not built enough housing to keep pace with demand created by job and population growth, leading to historically low vacancy rates. Housing costs as a share of income have grown steadily since 2000, with the greatest stress for low and moderate income households. Regions with strong labor markets, such as coastal California, Greater Boston, and New York City, have built too little housing for more than 30 years. The increasing prevalence of hybrid and remote work since the COVID-19 pandemic has created housing shortages in previously affordable regions, including Columbus, Ohio, and Nashville, Tennessee. Rural resort areas such as Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and Sun Valley, Idaho, have seen increased demand for seasonal and vacation homes, but face a severe shortage of moderately priced housing for hospitality and service workers. Tight housing supply and rising costs are not just a problem for individual families. Regional economies function better when workers across a range of incomes can afford housing within a reasonable commute of their jobs. Relaxing overly strict regulations could help increase housing supply and improve affordability. America's housing shortage is not simply the result of market forces. Local governments across the US have adopted zoning laws and other policies that make it difficult to build more homes where people want to live. These laws have become more complex and restrictive over time, especially in high-opportunity communities. Single-family exclusive zoning is one of the most common zoning practices. More than 3/4 of the land in US cities and suburbs is reserved exclusively for single-family detached homes, meaning that row houses, duplexes, and apartment buildings of all sizes are simply illegal to build. This rule creates challenges both for affordability and for expanding housing supply. Single-family homes with yards require more land per home than other structures, and therefore are more expensive to buy or to rent. Additionally, communities that were developed as low-density single-family neighborhoods in previous decades are now built out under their current zoning. They have no remaining undeveloped land. Regulatory barriers to manufactured and modular housing are especially problematic in rural areas, where manufactured homes have traditionally been an important source of moderately priced housing. The past several years have seen an unprecedented amount of housing policy experimentation, often with bipartisan support. Cities including Anchorage, Minneapolis, Raleigh, and Salt Lake City have passed reforms aimed at legalizing missing middle housing types. State legislators from Oregon to Montana to Massachusetts have passed statewide laws aimed at increasing the diversity of housing options. The federal government can more effectively support these state and local pro-housing innovations through 3 channels. First, HUD could serve as a useful facilitator between state and local policymakers that are currently experimenting with pro-housing policies. Regular convenings between policymakers and researchers would allow them to share insights on how policy changes are working in real time. Second, HUD should develop and share clear, accessible guidelines on best practices for policies that support housing production in different types of local and regional markets. Third, HUD and DOT should offer financial incentives that encourage local and state governments to better integrate their investments in housing, land use, and transportation. The bipartisan infrastructure law offers some models for how to do this. To coordinate these activities, HUD should designate a staff member to focus on housing supply and land use as their primary responsibility. Housing affordability has become increasingly urgent for many Americans over the past decade. Cities and states are experimenting with zoning reforms to increase housing supply and create more diverse options. The federal government can better support those efforts, relieving financial stress on families and improving the overall economy. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. We will next hear from Ms. Flistrand, who's joining us remotely.
Thank you, Chair Smith, Senator Lummis, and all of the members of the Housing, Transportation, and Community Development Subcommittee for the opportunity to testify about Minneapolis' trailblazing housing policy. My name is Jana Flistrand, and I am a co-founder of a local advocacy group called Neighbors for More Neighbors. We stand up for secure, abundant homes for everyone in Minneapolis. And we envision a future where we all find secure and affordable homes in the neighborhoods that we choose. We want those neighborhoods to provide easy access to jobs, amenities, family, and friends. We want our neighborhoods to have all kinds of homes so that as our needs change, we can stay in the communities that we love. We imagine a day where this is true for everyone, owners and renters, people of all ethnicities and income levels. So nationally, we have a roughly 4 million home shortage. In Minnesota, that is about 95,000 unbuilt homes. And in Minneapolis alone, we need 4,000 new homes a year to house our growing population and fill our housing shortage. Thanks to recent policy changes in Minneapolis, we are starting to get them built. Around 10 years ago, people in Minneapolis recognized that our zoning and permitting process was in the way of us building the homes that we needed. City leaders began realigning these policies that match our stated values: affordable, inclusive, and climate friendly. Volunteer advocates like me pushed to shift regulations away from arbitrary, discretionary, project-by-project approvals. Those regulations favored the unaffordable status quo. To fix those rules, we had to think differently about our cities. Making this change took 3 groups of people working together. That first group is community members like us. We used humor and art, social media, and blogs to focus attention on the problems and to demand solutions. That second group is city staff, who brought data and designed a planning process that made space for more voices to weigh in on our land use plan. And then finally, elected leaders had to respond and vote to adopt and implement that plan. Our city planners re-envisioned community engagement to our collective values and our vision. That created the shape of the plan. They made space for people whose second shift jobs and lack of childcare don't usually let them attend public meetings. They invited people into a conversation with fun and food and innovative questions. It felt more like the state fair than a shouting match. And they got different results. They heard from thousands of people, including younger, lower income residents and interest groups who don't usually think about land use. As advocates, we engaged with this process at every turn and contributed some research of our own. When powerful people defended single-family zoning by distributing hyperbolic "don't bulldoze our neighborhood" signs, we biked every block of the city, mapping them, and found that the opposition was concentrated in neighborhoods that had benefited the most from redlining and other exclusionary practices. We turned residents out to city events, tabled, and talked to our family, friends, and the media. We called for a predictable set of rules that lets us build more homes, more types of homes, and less expensive homes. A series of zoning changes made this possible. The most important changes were ending our apartment ban and eliminating parking minimums. Our city has built an average of 3,740 homes each of the last 4 years, close to that goal of 4,000 a year. We're still short of the homes that we need, but by building these homes, that has put rent increases in check. They are a key reason why our metro recently recorded the lowest inflation rate in the country. Zoning is a locally controlled issue, but there is a role for national policy to incentivize these local changes, to subsidize new homes, to stabilize construction boom and bust cycles, and to re-implement long-abandoned federal low-interest loan programs for affordable urban and rural housing. Passing and funding this work at the federal level could play a major role in ensuring that we have enough quality homes for all of our neighbors. But for today, what I want you to know is that there are people like me, groups like Neighbors for More Neighbors, all over the United States. We are fighting to create communities where homes are abundant and affordable, and where our neighborhoods are stronger because we all welcome new neighbors instead of keeping our neighbors out.
Thank you so much. Mr. Good, you'll go next.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Smith, Ranking Member Loomis, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I am Gregory Good, Chief Real Estate Development Officer and Director of Asset Management for Invest Newark, and a Strong Towns Advisory Board member. I'm honored and humbled to be here today. Invest Newark is a New Jersey nonprofit 501c3 with a mission to drive the city of Newark's strong and diverse economy, build vibrant communities, and create opportunities for all Newarkers. We are staffed with a dedicated team of planners, real estate professionals, and urban design innovators who are focused on 1, supporting small, women, and minority-owned businesses, 2, investing in world-class internet access throughout our city, 3, catalyzing commercial, residential, and mixed-use real estate development citywide, and 4, executing economic development activities to produce and sustain economic growth, generate jobs, and create wealth for the citizens of Newark. Today, I will focus on a key component that serves as the vehicle to drive our economic development agenda. The Newark Land Bank, which is New Jersey's first and only land bank, and for which Invest Newark is the operator. Through the Newark Land Bank, Invest Newark acquires, maintains, and repurposes vacant, abandoned, and foreclosed properties throughout Newark's neighborhoods. The benefits to operating a land bank are many, but there are a few I must state explicitly. The land bank aids in the retention and expediting of the decision-making process over the public assets. The land bank decreases blight and negative environmental activity that comes with derelict properties. The land bank establishes a localized capacity to keep properties under management, which supports increases in surrounding property values while strengthening the city's tax base. Beyond these benefits, the broader intrinsic value to Newark Land Bank should be stated clearly. We use the disposition of properties to create greater housing affordability and to close Newark's wealth gap. Newark faces a 16,000 unit deficit of affordable housing as indicated in the 2022 report by the Rutgers-Newark Center for Law and Equality and Metropolitan Equity. Newark's Mayor Raj J. Baraka has committed his administration to creating and or preserving 6,600 affordable units by 2026, with the Newark Land Bank providing capacity to prioritize local home ownership and counteract investor-owner trends. We partner with the Newark Housing Authority and segment of its nearly 5,400 active housing choice voucher holders, otherwise known as Section 8, to help convert rental assistance vouchers to mortgage assistance vouchers, and then purchase homes made available through Invest Newark's Land Bank program. Our success with the Land Bank is driven by our ability to leverage public assets to preserve and support affordability. But there remains a key missing ingredient: affordable financing, not just to buy, but to build. The costs to produce affordable housing at scale are prohibitive in many American housing markets. Building materials prices have increased over 85% since 2020, according to Gordian, a national provider of building intelligence solutions. Consequently, developers raise rents to pay for the increases in material costs and labor. We see this across the country today, where luxury housing development with highly amenitized features, doormen, fitness centers, and rooftop pools emerge in highly concentrated areas with few affordable options. We are facing an economy that provides units for higher income residents nearly exclusively when the demand for housing is much more weighted towards the lower end of the economic spectrum. Therefore, the issue of housing in America today is more complex than the simplified trope of the greedy developer. Most housing developers only aim to provide quality housing while earning a living doing so. The real issue today is finance. Public and private financing incentivizes large-scale projects with higher concentration of high-end units over small to mid-sized development at lower densities. Therefore, we don't have homes where we need them at the price most Americans can afford. Land banks, such as the one we run at Invest Newark, are one vehicle that aims to address the obstacles of home ownership and affordable housing development. But more capital, especially unrestricted capital, is still needed to fund these innovative solutions to put housing back in reach. It is worth noting that programs like low-income housing tax credits and new market tax credits, which ensure affordable housing is included in larger development projects, are important programs that produce needed housing across the country. However, there are only so many developers that can produce at such a large scale. The federal government needs to develop additional incentives or mandates for banks to lend to housing developers for smaller projects. More housing can be built if there are more small-scale developers receiving bank commitments. We see such examples of the power of small developers in South Bend, Indiana, where small developers have counted together produced the most housing in the city. Senator Smith, you'd be happy to note, Strong Towns of Minnesota is a great organization raising awareness for local, incremental change across our country. To achieve better housing outcomes, the federal government can also create more public financing options to reduce barriers to development and boost the supply of quality, affordable housing. While there's much more to say about all that we can do for affordable housing, I'm excited to be here and answer the Senator's questions on this very urgent and important issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Shaffer.
Thank you, Chairwoman Smith and Ranking Member Lummis, members of the subcommittee, for the opportunity to testify today for your hearing on housing supply and innovation. The hearing is timely, given the lack of affordable housing across our country, which has been exacerbated by workforce shortages, supply chain disruptions, coupled with inflation and entitlement burdens and design approval challenges. I am Eric Shaffer, Chief Business Development Officer at Fading West in Buena Vista, Colorado. Fading West began in 2016 with what we thought was going to be a one-off affordable housing development of about 200 homes in the missing middle, 80 to 120% of the area median income, called the farm at Buena Vista. We have found that modular manufacturing carries significant advantages over stick-built construction and incorporated it into home building. I'm here today because Fading West and the modular manufacturing industry firmly believes that the U.S. Congress can have a role in helping the nation's home building industry to continue to innovate and thereby be a partner in resolving the housing shortages across our country. We've heard it now numerous times. In the U.S., it's over 3.8 million houses units short, and that number is increasing every year, and there's no clear path on how to address the root and systemic causes, which include the declining skilled trade workforce, the supply chain disruptions and escalating building costs, long, complex, and costly entitlement process, and significantly, every home has its own design and approval process. Collectively, these root causes result in lower efficiencies and quality builds that in turn mean increased costs and housing prices. So Fading West has integrated the entire construction value stream by combining real estate development, modular manufacturing, general contracting to reduce waste, while improving quality and speed. We can build homes 10 to 20% less expensive by reducing waste from 30% to less than 6%, standardizing processes and products, and creating a productive, climate-controlled factory workspace. We can complete homes 50 to 80% quicker than traditional construction. A typical Fading West home is built in less than 10 working days in our factory, and then is completed at the site in less than 30 days. So from start to finish, a new home can be completed then in less than 40 days compared to the usual 9-month or more for traditional stick-built construction. I can speak more specifically to affordable housing in our home state of Colorado, where Governor Jared Polis has embraced the inclusion of modular manufacturing in the construction of affordable housing across our state and undertaken actions to facilitate and prioritize the use of modular as a solution for affordable housing. For example, Fading West recently partnered with Vail Valley Habitat for Humanity to build 16 homes in Eagle County. Habitat could only have built 3 homes this year on this site had they used the usual stick-built construction model. Habitat used state funds along with their philanthropic donations to cover the construction cost for 16 homes. It took Fading West 1 month to build these modular components for the 16 homes in our factory. These components will now be shipped and assembled on concrete foundations where some sweat equity is still needed to build out garages and to paint and finish porches. But 16 families, many of them local teachers who have toured our factory, will be moving into these homes later this year. The modular industry is constantly evolving, adopting new and sustainable materials, as well as digital technologies that enhance design and improve productivity. The taxpayer cost savings for homes built with modular is also evident. Manufacturers can speed construction by 50% and cut costs by 20%. We strongly believe that home builders that utilize this innovative technology are best positioned to help address the affordable housing crisis. With growing housing shortages facing local and state and federal officials, I offer the following recommendations to the members of Congress. Provide grants and 0% interest loans to modular manufacturing facilities to increase the housing supply instead of subsidizing the demand side. Tie federally funded projects to a standard construction code and entitlement process, and as a long-term solution, mandate for regional building codes to streamline the housing construction process. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify before this subcommittee, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, everybody. And we are now going to begin our round of questioning by members of the subcommittee, and we will start with Senator Reed.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for the kindness and graciousness, and Madam Ranking Member. Dr. Schultz, we know that zoning is a constraint on so many affordable housing projects, and HUD recently opened the PRO, Pro Housing Grant Program, which you might be familiar with, and it was created by the fiscal year 23 Omnibus Appropriations Bill to help localities identify and remove barriers. And is this program a good example of what we can do and we should do more of?
Yeah, so yes, to the extent that we know so far. This is obviously a very new program. It's a great example of the federal government guiding funds towards places that want to change their local zoning and land use regulations. I will say that two things are important to consider with these federal grants. One is to make sure that they are accessible for smaller communities that maybe have a difficult time applying through the federal grant system. And the other is to think about how the grants are awarded to make sure that HUD has the internal technical capacity so that they can evaluate the applications and determine who actually has a feasible plan that's likely to work on the ground.
Well, what more can we do? Because many times it is a capacity issue, technical skill, personnel to redo your zoning code so that, one, you allow affordable housing, but two, you do maintain, in many respects, the character of the community. So are there any other suggestions you have?
Yes, this is definitely a capacity issue at the state and local level for places that want to redo their zoning, figuring out what the rules are that are the biggest problem and how to change them, whether it's legalizing more types of structures or getting rid of parking requirements. And often local governments don't have in-house capacity to do that, so they rely on consultants. More technical assistance from HUD, more kinds of direct guidance. If your housing market looks like this and your zoning looks like this, these are the kinds of changes you could consider. And particularly with the policy experimentation going on, we have great opportunities to learn what kinds of reforms work in what kinds of markets, and then provide that information and guidance to other communities.
Right. I just have a sense from my experience in Rhode Island is that there's kind of this built-in resistance because we don't want to change the character of the community, et cetera, but my also sense of seeing some project is you can do projects in practically any community that does not alter dramatically the character of the community. Is that your sense too?
Absolutely, and a lot of the emphasis has been on allowing smaller projects, so duplexes, triplexes. New England has wonderful triple-deckers all over that are very much a part of the fabric of the community. And every community, including smaller towns and rural areas, have examples of these smaller areas, integrated housing with commercial as part of a main street in small towns. So we have great examples everywhere, and reminding people we used to allow this all the time. It's really going back to that.
Well, thank you. And Mr. Shaffer, I was very interested in your comments about manufactured homes. Do you find that one of your obstacles is zoning, basically, that they just prohibit manufactured homes?
So we build modular homes, which is a little bit different. So ours are International Building Code 2021, so they're just the regular homes. Now, to answer your question, though, where the zoning comes in is there's 300 different building codes in our state just alone. So that is where the slowdown comes. Our innovation is that we are really we're almost like a car factory, a manufacturing car factory building houses, right? And so we can build 400 homes a year out of our factory or 800 apartments, but where we get slowed down is we then have to change to fit each building code. So that is where we get tripped up, and if you slow down, then it costs more.
So it suggests state action as well as federal action.
That is correct.
And perhaps in terms of collaboration, HUD can be collaborating with the states too and trying to simplify, because I think your approach is one that will meet this extreme demand in a shorter period of time than going out and building from scratch. But I thank the witnesses, and again, I thank the chairwoman. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Senator Lummis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And again, thank you, witnesses, for being here. Dr. Schutz, a lot of focus has been placed on supply shortages and what can be done in urban areas. What does the housing shortfall look like in rural communities?
Thanks for that question. Rural areas have been a little under the radar until recently, but they're definitely coming to the forefront. Many of the rural areas in places like Colorado and places like Wyoming have seen very strong demand for seasonal and vacation homes. Rural areas have some particular challenges. Generally, the demand for housing is for smaller properties. The larger home builders don't have economies of scale that would justify working there. Often they have shortfalls of construction workers. They're not close to the areas where materials are produced or imported. Manufactured and modular housing is one of the great potential solutions there, because within about a 500-mile radius of the factory, that can be produced in the factory and then shipped and assembled on site. It is important to make sure that zoning and building codes allow that to be built, and thinking about the most efficient way to provide that. Also thinking about what the infrastructure is that's available. A lot of communities in the West are very concerned about their water access and availability, so thinking about where housing can be built to make the best use of existing infrastructure.
Well, I would call to all of your attention an article that was in Cowboy State Daily yesterday, which is a Wyoming-based online newspaper. The article is about squatting in national forests. It's about people who are going to national forests or state campgrounds and basically living. You're supposed to stay for 14 days over a 28-day period. I'm sure this is happening in your state too. And people are going to campgrounds and they don't have homes. So they're going to campgrounds, pull their campers in or tents, and stay beyond the 14-day limits, sometimes for months, sometimes for years. And so this is having impacts in all areas, and they make specific reference in this article to campgrounds and national forests that are near urban areas, specifically Denver. So that leads into my question for you, Mr. Shaffer. Can you talk about how rural areas, particularly mountain communities in the West, struggle to provide enough housing?
Yes, Senator Lummis. So as you know, in Wyoming and Colorado and Montana, all our neighboring states, when we tried to do this affordable housing project in Buena Vista, we could not find subs. We could not find general contractors. If we did, it would take years to get a project of something like 200 homes to be completed in a town of under 3,000. And so truly our only way to solve this was to use modular. And 85–90% of a modular home is built in a controlled environment. You have a long building season, right? You can build year round. And as you know, with frozen ground in Wyoming, it's short building seasons, and the same in Colorado. So for us, it was the only way that this would work. And from there, we decided to build our own factory, which has now been open almost 2 years. And now we are building affordable housing projects throughout the state of Colorado, from Breckenridge to Telluride to other, Gunnison, Fairplay, all the rural towns throughout the state.
So you're talking about places that have extraordinary insulation needs because of our cold winters, and tremendously capable roofs to bear the snow loads that we're accustomed to. And your construction can handle that.
Correct. So the climate zones, there's 7 climate zones in our state, climate zone 7 being the coldest. So that would be, Leadville or Telluride, one of those places. And so what we have decided to do is everything that comes out of our factory is built to climate zone 7. Wow. So it's built to the coldest for snow and wind loads. We use engineered lumber, so the houses are very tight. They pass all the green tests as well. So these houses we're finding are lasting longer than traditional stick-built homes.
Can you tell us a little more about your modular construction to build multifamily and apartments?
Yes, we just finished our first project, and it just was delivered in July to downtown Breckenridge. So it's going right behind the police station in Breckenridge on the way into town. 60 units. These boxes were enormous. They were 76 feet long, shipping them down the highway. They were built in our factory in May and June and set in July. And people will be moving into these affordable homes, affordable apartments by the holidays.
Do you have to go through the Eisenhower Tunnel to get there?
No, we don't.
Could you?
Yes, I don't think we could. No, you
Yeah.
have to find some other roads because the height requirements would be very challenging. But again, the time to build these stick built this project would have gone on for years, and we're able to knock it out, as I said, from April to Thanksgiving.
Well, housing for workers, especially in resort communities, is extreme. It's an extreme challenge. Dr. Schutz, you mentioned it. I have a farm and a home in Star Valley, Wyoming. It's about an hour south of Jackson, town of Jackson. And it's a constant stream from about 5 a.m. of commuters who are working at the Jackson Hole Airport, in the restaurants downtown, building houses, teaching students in the schools. So all of the support people are coming from either over Teton Pass, which can be pretty hazardous in the winter, or up from Star Valley by the droves, because there's just no worker housing in Jackson. That's not a problem unique to Jackson. You've mentioned other communities all over the West, resort-type communities. And it's also true with some of our urban interfaces. So the problems that you're solving with your approaches are extremely important, and they're being done, as Americans do, by the ingenuity of the individual. I'd like to visit about, and I think this is a question for you, Mr. Good, financing. When you find something like what Mr. Shaffer's doing in Colorado, and it solves a problem where you are, how do you help them identify ways to make their product available in the communities you serve?
Thank you, Senator. Well, to start, the first thing is how do we incorporate this with jobs, right?
Yeah.
So to the extent that we can have a factory like come to New Jersey and do this sort of like modular development, like on site, closer to the places where we need it, that would be really integral. Second to that is if it's fairly new, right, state regulations, as you've highly pointed out, could be a bit problematic. So educating the new governments and the city codes and the state code to allow for these sorts of developments is vitally important and crucial. But more important than that, I think that Eric's project is fantastic, and it really should be like exemplary across the country. Like, how do we get housing costs down, right? Yeah. Whether you're in rural Wyoming, Spring Valley, like you said, or in Newark, working families and people have a difficult time finding access to quality housing that's proximate to their jobs. And I think that's our task here today to figure that out.
Well, thank you, witnesses. My time is up, and I'm going to run and vote, and I know you have to do that as well. But this hearing has just been really enlightening, and I'm really grateful to you for holding it. I yield back, and I hope to be back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Lummis. We'll now turn to Senator Fetterman.
Thank you, Ms. Chairwoman. Thank you. You know, I know all of you experts all know that there's not a single state, county, or city anywhere where a full-time worker, earning minimum wage can afford a 2-bedroom apartment. Correct? It's a disgrace. It's a natural disgrace. And we of course have that issue. I'm from Pennsylvania, and of course there's states and the nation that have more of a severe problem. But Doctor, I really want to ask you, how does a lack of affordable options near opportunity hurt the economy?
That's a great question, Senator. We know that when housing costs are high, that employers have a hard time hiring and retaining workers, whether it's some of the rural communities that we've been talking about or in urban areas. If people can't live close to their jobs, they may move to an entirely different area where housing is cheaper, and that's certainly been an issue for the expensive communities. We also know that when people spend a higher share of their monthly income on the rent or the mortgage, they have less money to spend on everything else, including neighborhood-serving businesses. So local and regional economies really suffer when housing is too expensive.
Thank you. Community land trusts are a model. In fact, I think Pennsylvania, my understand is really a national model. I mean, I think I say, can you talk more about community land trusts, how they work for people, and how they can preserve affordability in communities seeing renewal?
I can talk a little bit, and I'll defer to my fellow witness who probably knows more of the details as well. Community land trusts can be an important way to acquire properties and hold them for a period of time. They can be used to develop housing that can be rented or sold, but they mean long-term affordability. So it's particularly important in communities where housing costs are getting more expensive over time and providing long-term affordability that stays essentially out of the private market.
Yeah. And any of the experts, are any of our current programs failing that should be changed?
Senator, I'm not sure that I would go so far as to say they're failing. I would go to say that we can do a lot more and do it a lot differently and expand access to financing for developers and manufacturers alike to get in front of the curve with community land trusts and land banks. Oftentimes they work better in areas that are seeing the moment come to them and have it not reached a point of oversaturation of luxury rental development. And so I think there's a great chance to improve a lot that has been done. I wouldn't necessarily call anything a failure. I think production of housing is going great. We just need to improve it a bit. Sir.
Thank you. And now I'm going to cede the remain of my time for a virtual question.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Senator Fetterman.
Thank you.
Senator Menendez.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad we're exploring innovation in the housing sector, but we should also know that we could see similar benefits by updating many of our existing federal housing programs. The National Low Income Housing Coalition's 2022 Out of Reach report showed just how hard it is for low-income renters to afford even modest housing. In my home state of New Jersey, a medium-income renter is barely able to pay for a one-bedroom home. The fact is that there aren't just enough rental homes being built. And part of that is because federal lending programs through HUD and the Federal Housing Administration haven't kept pace with the market. Dr. Schutz, isn't it true that even after adjustments for inflation and higher cost areas, FHA multifamily financing isn't a viable financing tool in many parts of the country?
I'm not an expert in the FHA multifamily program. I will say that it has been a real challenge to keep pace with sort of the housing costs are rising faster than inflation rates overall, and so that's been very challenging on the financing side. And it's certainly been an issue in the last couple of years as interest rates are going up. Builders trying to get private market financing are also paying more at all costs of the construction process.
Well, it seems to me that the current statutory limits pose a challenge to HUD and FHA meeting its mission to provide decent, safe, and affordable housing, which is why I introduced a discussion draft earlier this year that would modernize FHA's ability to finance multifamily housing construction around the country. It's a simple, common-sense proposal that would update FHA's lending ability to accurately reflect the increase in construction costs over the last 20 years. And I look forward to working with our colleagues to see if we can pass this into law and empower the FHA to better address the high cost of rent across the country. One of the ways we can reduce the pressure on the affordable rental housing supply is by making it easier for renting families to transition into ownership. This will free up rental units and allow families to begin building generational wealth. However, that transition is often difficult, especially for prospective home buyers of color. Mr. Good, could you talk about some of the challenges that your organization has helped prospective home buyers in New Jersey overcome?
Yes, Senator, thank you for that question. At Invest Newark, what we've done is we've partnered with the Newark Housing Authority and with the national organization NACA to address this issue and bridge the gap between those in rent-subsidized apartments who are looking to go into home ownership. This has been a great program. Everybody is very excited about it. And what we found is that there were tools already available through the federal government, through HUD, and there just needed to be the nexus point between Invest Newark and the nonprofit coaching and getting folks ready for home ownership that we found vitally important.
One key problem seems to me that all too often first-time home buyers are competing with institutional investors who can afford to purchase the home with cash. A study from the Rutgers Center on Law, Inequality, and Metropolitan Equity found that from 2017 to 2020, more than 47% of Newark's residential property was sold to corporate buyers rather than prospective homeowners. This also warps incentives for developers, compounding the supply issues. Mr. Good, how can we, in your experience, how can we incentivize developers to build properties that are affordable for low and moderate income families trying to become homeowners?
Yeah, so one of the ways that Invest Newark has done that is, time kills all deals. And we found that there have been a backlog of properties with the city of Newark. We've transitioned those to Invest Newark in an effort to expedite them into the market specifically to provide homeownership opportunities for potential homeowners who are earning less than 80% of AMI. The disparity between the homeownership rates, specifically in the South and West wards, really speak to that crime issue. And that is where you find preponderance of the properties that we are receiving from the city are coming from.
Okay,
so
last question. I'm sorry, did you want to finish?
No, Senator, I'm fine.
Okay, I appreciate that insight. Last question, if I may, Madam Chair. Affordable housing is increasingly located in areas that are far away from job centers, forcing workers to pay higher transportation costs or work fewer hours. Thankfully, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that passed the last Congress injected as much as $550 billion into reviving our nation's transportation system. That's a good start, but that's why I led the charge with my Livable Communities Act, which creates a federal grant program to incentivize the development of new affordable housing near existing mass transit. In a place like Newark, and this is true across the country, it's not just Newark, how critical is it that we can build affordable housing near public transit so that people can connect to good-paying jobs and careers?
Senator, this might be a uniquely interesting question for New Jersey. Everything is quite accessible to transit. Your legislation is going to be vitally important. There was just a report put out by Parking Reform where something about 26% of the central business district in Newark is covered with parking lots. And so to incentivize additional growth for affordable housing and housing development in transit village areas and in around train stations, bus stations as well, will go a great way to producing additional opportunity to incentivize developers to put the units as close to housing, employment, and transportation as possible.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you for your insights. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. We now have Senator Cortez Masto, who's joining us from her office.
Senator Menendez's comments just recently, and I have to thank Dr. Schutz for working with me and my staff on the Better Plan Act, which we were able to put in the bipartisan infrastructure package. And what it really does is it enhances coordination between the metropolitan planning organizations and local land use authorities, actually requiring NDOT to work with HUD and focus on how we provide this nexus between affordable housing and transit, particularly in Western states where we don't have that nexus. And it is so important in a town like Nevada, in Southern Nevada, where it's 24 hours. Our workers are working 24 hours. And so we need that nexus between the three of them. So I was so pleased to be able to see that and actually see Department of Transportation and HUD working together. I'm going to add one more thing to this in the Western states, and I'm sure Senator Lummis would appreciate this. It's not just HUD and transportation. For the Western states, where a lot of our land's owned by the federal government, it's usually Department of Interior, BLM, who has to be a key partner in affordable housing and getting that land at a reasonable rate so that we can build affordable housing there. And so I'm always looking for that partnership and coordination. One of the innovative things that we have done, and I'm hearing about this happening in some of the other states, and you're talking about it, is this idea of land trust. Nevada, for the first time, has established our first land trust. We will have 200 permanently affordable homes for purchase on federal land and 30 on county land. But here's my issue, and this is what I'm going to ask the panelists to help me with. My staff has spent the last 6 weeks trying to find lenders willing to make mortgage loans for 230 single-family deed-restricted land trust homes for moderate income home buyers in Clark County, Nevada. That's Southern Nevada. I don't think it should be this difficult. But I'm going to open this question to the panelists, particularly those who are familiar with land trusts. What will it take? What do we have to do? How do we improve Fannie, Freddie, Federal Home Loan Banks, FHA, and Ginnie Mae to guarantee these land trust mortgages? I'm curious how you've dealt with this and any ideas that you have for me that I can take back home. And maybe I let me open it up to Mr. Good and then maybe Dr. Schutz.
Yes. Thank you, Senator, for that question. I think broadly speaking, right, the federal government has addressed this in the housing discrimination context, right, as it relates to race and all those sort of things. So the federal government's role in addressing the bank's reluctance to allow for mortgages for community land trusts and the deed restrictions in perpetuity will probably be addressed in that context and say, listen, like if you're going to accept federal funds, if you're going to be participating in this economy, you have to lend to homeowners who are outside of the economy. You have to be able to provide housing and mortgages to those who might be locked out from the typical private banking context.
Well, I appreciate then that's the private banks, but I can't even get Fannie and Freddie and Ginnie Mae and some of the others to engage as well. So any other panelists have, and thank you for that. That's very helpful. Any other ideas about how we open this door and get these lenders to be engaged in a process that I think is pretty safe for them, actually? So I'm just curious if anybody has any other ideas.
I will say that this is layering two complicated problems on top of one another. One is the issue of the long-term affordability, and the other is the issue of building on federal land. And so there certainly are community land trusts in other places, in Senator Smith's home state, that have been doing home ownership and have figured out how to do lending for home ownership with long-term affordability restrictions. That's common also for inclusionary zoning programs that have home ownership components. But adding on the federal land ownership is a new twist. We'll say that it's probably true that your state isn't the only one seeing this, since federal ownership of land is so common in the West. This seems like an area where community development financial institutions, potentially local credit unions could be brought into the conversation. Fannie and Freddie are best at solving large-scale problems that are kind of standardized across the country rather than kind of niche financial products. But this seems like an area that should be solvable with people at the table.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, let me just say thank you for this conversation, and to our chairwoman and the ranking member. Thank you for always elevating the discussion here around affordability and when it comes to housing. There's a need in Nevada in our urban and rural areas, as we have also seen across the country. So thank you, and thank you to the panelists.
Thank you so much, Senator Cortez Masto. Now we have Senator Sinema joining us from her office.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. You know, wherever I go in Arizona, I hear from local leaders and everyday families about the housing supply challenges our state is facing. From Bullhead City to Clifton, from Casa Grande to the Navajo Nation, Arizonans across our state are struggling to find housing they can afford, and service providers are struggling to handle an influx of Arizonans experiencing homelessness. So right now, we've got real challenges that require real solutions, but not more tired partisan talking points. You know, growing up, my family fell on hard times and experienced homelessness. And that's why I'm laser focused on finding solutions to boost access to housing and opportunity so that all Arizonans can build better lives for themselves and their families. The truth is that issues of housing supply and homelessness are very much related. When the Arizonans experiencing homelessness seek emergency shelter, they often struggle to find a shelter with availability. Homeless shelters across Arizona tell me that one big reason for this lack of availability is that there's no transitional housing options available for Arizonans trying to get back on their feet. That forces many Arizonans to treat emergency shelter as a permanent solution. So our shelters lack capacity. And it's why homelessness has seemed so much more visible lately in Phoenix and in other communities across our state. Arizona is 270,000 units short on housing. Increasing the supply of affordable housing is an important step to help families make ends meet and address homelessness in our communities. Dr. Schutz, thank you for being here. Recently, the city of Phoenix changed the law to allow homeowners to build accessory dwelling units, known locally as casitas. What effects will this type of change have on supply and affordability in the Phoenix area?
Thanks for that question. We have new evidence, I think, coming out of California, which is the first state that really legalized building ADUs or casitas statewide. And California took a while for the industry to really build up speed, developing standardized plans, so modular casitas that can be built off-site and delivered to people's homeowners, and getting in place the financing so that homeowners can borrow money to build and acquire that, and then pay the loan off over time if they rent the property out. And what we've seen is that California has been building 60,000 casitas now since it's been legalized. So this has become really an industry and can be an important part of helping the solution, both as an income source for low-income homeowners and also as a source of additional housing that can be rented out in the community.
Thank you. Ms. Flistrand, thank you for being here. What is your opinion on these types of local laws that allow homeowners to build casitas?
Thank you, Senator. I agree with Dr. Schutz. I was able to become a homeowner because I was able to purchase a fourplex. And that's a different example, but it was the same model as an ADU, that it was multiple units, there was income to support me. And being able to allow that for more homeowners by legalizing casitas or accessory dwelling units is a critical piece of the supply.
Well, thank you. Many in the housing industry have discussed the value of prefabricated and manufactured housing options, including multifamily options, as a solution to reduce housing costs. This question is for any witness who wishes to answer. What policy considerations should we be mindful of when thinking about scaling up the number of prefabricated and manufactured homes?
Thank you, Senator. I can answer that. Again, it's on the supply side. So our manufacturing factory cost about $35 million to be built. From that, we can build either 800 multifamily homes or 400 single-family homes, or since we've been talking about ADUs, we could build, let's see, probably 20 ADUs a week out of our factory if we decided to go that route. So it is on the supply side. Arizona, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, the more factories we could have built would allow affordable housing to finally, for us to meet those needs.
Thank you. Do any other witnesses wish to respond?
Thank you, Senator Sinema. I think ADUs and casitas are a very good addition to the economy. I think it'd be worth noting that in the context of zoning, a lot of areas have outlawed rooming houses. And rooming houses were historically an incremental way to provide a safe, clean, and decent, accessible place of home ownership or unit to stay in transition from homelessness to the bigger apartment or to the bigger house. So I think we might have an additional zoning question to answer across the country as it relates to ADUs and casitas and this dearth of transitional housing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know that my time has expired, so I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Sinema. So let me start. I want to actually start with Ms. Flistrand, who's joining us remotely. So I'm thinking about a lot of communities that are very interested in the kinds of zoning reforms that Minneapolis has made, and yet they face, just concerns or lack of understanding from their neighbors about what this really means. So could you start out by just telling us what lessons should residents and organizers and community leaders and other places learn from your experience leading Neighbors for More Neighbors in Minneapolis?
One of the most important lessons is that change will be incremental. And When there was a discussion about allowing plexes everywhere in Minneapolis, when single-family zoning was ended in Minneapolis, there were people who were concerned that everything would change overnight. We have seen that there is growing interest in building duplexes, triplexes across the city, and that is very slow. We've seen approximately 50 per year in the years since the plan passed, and it is essentially unnoticeable in our communities. Nonetheless, that is adding more units of homes to our neighborhood, and more of our neighborhoods have places to live. That also is true. We allowed more housing along major corridors in larger buildings, and one larger building can often provide 40, 80, or 100 homes. So it doesn't take a lot of change to add a significant number of homes to a community.
Thank you. As I listen to you talk about your experience also figuring out ways of engaging more people in the process of expressing their opinions, I think that there's a lot to learn for us there. I like your analogy very much of saying that it was more like a scary town meeting where people are mad at each other, and more like the state fair, which definitely sounds like more fun to me. There's a lot of conversation, and there's a lot of this conversation when you dig into it. You end up hearing about this term missing middle, which I want to just dive into a little bit. It's so maybe, Dr. Schutz, could you just explain, what do people mean by missing middle? Why is it missing? And what should we do to kind of enliven that part of the housing sector? And if you could think about what that means, not only for big cities, but also small towns that might be experiencing the same challenges.
That's a great question. By missing middle, we generally mean everything in between a single-family detached house and a large high-rise apartment.
Yeah.
So if you think about sort of on a spectrum, we have detached houses, we have row houses, which we're surrounded by in Washington, D.C., duplexes, triplexes, low-rise garden apartments that are generally walk-up, everything up to a high-rise apartment. So all of those homes in between we call missing middle because they're not built very frequently anymore. And if we walk around our older neighborhoods, not just in big cities, but in small communities, we see lots and lots of examples of these, generally built before about 1940. These were very common kinds of building types that we built before in large quantities often. And we just don't build them anymore, partly because zoning has made them illegal on the majority of land, partly because they're not the economies of scale that large builders want to build. If it takes you a year and a half to get through the permitting process, then you want to build a large number of units at the end of that.
Right. So this missing middle could be, for example, I'm thinking about a small town like Wilmer or Laverne, Minnesota, communities of 5, 10, 15,000 people. Those kinds of housing, that kind of housing would fit in communities like that just as well as it would fit in my hometown of Minneapolis, where that kind of, those sort of smaller apartment buildings or duplexes or triplexes are very characteristic of communities, all neighborhoods in Minneapolis.
That's exactly right. And every part of the country has examples of this. So on the East Coast, row house neighborhoods are a great example of missing middle. You can fit a lot of homes on a block, and they're very human scale, and people are used to them. Again, in New England and the Northeast, things like triple deckers, so stacking 3 apartments. Chicago has lots of 4 flats. So really every region of the country has examples in their architectural vernacular. And many of these are beloved structures. We walk through them and we love them. They feel very neighborhoody. Just making it legal to build these again would be great.
When people talk about neighborhood character, this is kind of often what they're talking about. And so there's really 2 issues here I think I'm hearing you say. One is that we basically made this kind of housing construction illegal when we moved to sort of exclusive single family, larger lot kinds of development. But the other issue seems to be that there's just economies of scale for developers. This is part of the conversation about how we have large developers wanting to build large developments, and we have lost that small. There's also a missing middle in terms of the small developers building small. How do we fix that?
We see that in places that have lower regulatory barriers to development, where it's easier to build and crucially where it's faster to build, that there are more small-scale family-owned development companies, and they often want to build these smaller apartment buildings. I think this is also a great place for things like the modular and prefab housing, because you could develop a model fourplex and just put that together and essentially do the same thing over and over. The Fan neighborhood in Richmond is a great area to look at, where we used to build fourplexes and sixplexes like we build single-family houses. It's essentially the same structure replicated over and over. It can be very economical, and manufactured housing can be great for that.
Yeah, and Mr. Shaffer, I would love to get you in on this part of the conversation. You know, we were talking earlier about our common friend, Christian Lawrence, who has a company, Rise Modular, that is doing what Mr. Shaffer's company is doing. They are just about completed with building like 50 or 60 scattered site, very affordable units using the modular construction technique. And as you say, it's costing less, and it is not taking nearly as much time. And talk about how modular construction could help to fit into this missing middle gap.
Yeah, and I'm going to use an example because it's really how Fading West came into existence. So we were trying to tackle what we've been talking about, discussing this afternoon, this missing middle. So for us, it was first shrinking the size of the lots.
Yep.
So we have 10 homes per acre in Buena Vista for, again, a small town. We have 5 plexes, but then the other piece to missing middle that we love is you want a community that when your family changes, you don't have to move out of your neighborhood. So you want some bigger houses, maybe with bigger square footage, 3 or 4 bedroom homes, as well as 2-bedroom fourplexes or 5plexes. So it is that mixture too that allows for community to happen and some stability. And so modular really fits that perfectly because it's repeatable, and we can do it very quickly.
Right, right. And I think that there are a lot of misconceptions about what modular construction is. People think of it as not being as high quality as you call it, old-fashioned stick built. But would you like to just take a minute to dissuade people of that misperception?
Yeah, just a reminder, if we're using engineered lumber, the lumber then for your modular boxes are so precise that, again, all those blower door tests we pass with flying colors. The piece that is very important to Fading West is architecturally interesting. So one of the things you think of with modular, right, is houses that maybe are not great to look at. So that's one of the things, first and second story porches, interesting roof lines, staggered homes on triplexes, those kind of things. So, and then the exteriors, you can do anything you want with. So you could do stone siding or anything like that. So
throw a porch on it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if you came to see our homes, you would not know if I didn't tell you that they were built in a factory rather than on site.
Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting. I know I'm used up more than my share of the time, and I also know that they're holding a vote open for me, so I probably should go and vote pretty quickly. This has been a fascinating conversation. I'm so grateful to all of you for the issues that you've raised, and lots for us to think about. Senator Lummis, do you have any additional questions?
In interests of your making the vote, no, unless the witnesses want to make some concluding remark about, is there anything we wish you would have asked us that we didn't? Something that is just eating at you that you want to say?
I'd like to answer a question that I think Senator Fetterman was asking, which I didn't pick up on, which is to think not just about adding new housing through additional construction, but also about preserving the existing housing that we have. Our housing stock is aging. A lot of our homes are more than 40 years old. Many of them have deferred maintenance problems, and making sure that our existing homes stay habitable and in good condition is particularly important for lower rent and lower price houses. Often older homeowners or property owners can't maintain them, but keeping those houses healthy and habitable is just as important as adding additional homes to the stock.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, just a couple of Senator Smith's question with the legislation proposed by Senator Menendez about transportation and missing middle housing, right? Housing that reflects the urban character of like old school Minneapolis and Newark and Jackson is about people walking every day.
Mm-hmm.
People walk when they use public transportation and mass transit to get to and from where they're trying to go. And I think to the extent that your legislation and your advocacy can pair and couple urban transportation hubs and rural transportation hubs with housing development will go a long way to producing additional units that are scalable and walkable and accessible to many Americans.
And quickly, what the drum that I've been banging all afternoon, which is modular manufacturing facilities, it is the supply side to go after that. So whether it's through grants or low interest loans to allow factories to be built throughout the West, but also throughout the entire country. Thank you.
That's great.
In your witness?
Yes, I was just wondering if Ms. Flistrand has anything to add.
I would love to share that in Minneapolis, our rents have flattened out, which is dramatically different from the rest of the country. That started before the pandemic. And the main reason is that we have built a lot of homes. The focus on affordable housing is critical and important and the right place to focus, but most of the homes that we built were market rate homes. That helped make the lower cost housing more affordable as well. So we need many homes at every price point in many communities.
That's excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you so much to our witnesses today for being here and for providing testimony. I think that this committee hearing bears out what we both know, which is this is an area that is ripe for bipartisan work and much thinking to be done about what is the important role that the federal government can play. Even as Senator Lummis said, issues around zoning and land use and building codes are often dealt with at the local level. And we need to think, I believe, about how the federal government can be, make sure that our incentives are aligned in the right way, and also take a look at what we can do to encourage financing on the supply side for smaller developments and smaller starter homes, where I think there's a bit of a gap. Before we adjourn, I'd like to enter several statements into the record from the following organizations: the Turner Center for Housing Innovation, the National Multifamily Housing Council and the National Apartment Association, the Niskanen Center, the Bipartisan Policy Center, the Manufactured Housing Institute, and the International Code Council. Without objection, that's so ordered. For senators wishing to submit questions for the record, those questions are due 1 week from today on Tuesday, September 19th. For our witnesses, you will have 45 days to respond to any questions for the record. Thank you all again, and this hearing is now adjourned.